The Pitt Expeditions update introduced us to 2 new regions of post-war Pittsburgh, and wandering around there is a lot of interesting lore that can be discovered. In today's video, I'll be going through 10 different things you may have missed, including the sinister past of one NPC, some new lore on the Hellcat mercenary company, and how the inhospitable trench was created. Let's get started. First up today, we're talking about the new NPC Danilo, our contact for the mission Ashes to Fire.
I'm your contact in the trench.
He's not much of a talker.
That's not important.
He considers himself a professional.
You haven't seen the trench.
And he's something of an edgelord.
Don't you know it's bad manners to ask a shadow where it's going?
And he's also the reason why the Sanctum fell to the Fanatics. There are quite a few hints during the mission about his past. He wears the same gas mask as the Fanatic scouts he will ask you to hunt down. Taken separately, this isn't enough to condemn him, but continuing on to the outpost where you meet Ava Rose, the picture becomes a bit clearer. If you read through her journal entries littered around this location, you will read about a Fanatic tracker who lingered and eventually accepted gifts from her. By the time you reach the entrance to the cathedral, Danilo will tell you himself, when you ask him, how he knows so much.
Don't make me say it. There's only one way to know these parts as well as I do. Only one group with that much freedom in the pit. I can never change my past, but I can use it for better means.
So in no uncertain terms, he's admitting to being a Fanatic at one time. This might have been the end of it, except for some very interesting entries on the Fanatic Foreman's terminal in the Sanctum. The first entry tells us how the Fanatics managed to navigate the trench, with the help of a new tracker. In the second entry, the Foreman mentions that the tracker has gone missing, after being more quiet than usual. This actually lines up with the same tracker from Ava's notes. A note entitled Bad Omens can be found upstairs in the cathedral. It mentions a shadow outside the window that looked like a person. Like the note says, this could be nothing, but a shadow is something that is often used to describe Danilo by himself and others. We know too that the Fanatics did eventually find the Sanctum. If this was Danilo, perhaps discovering the survivors in the Sanctum, then he would also be culpable for finding them as well as guiding the raiders through the trench. All things considered, Danilo's demeanour and drive to make things right makes sense, considering the living hell he helped create. Circling back to Ava Rose, she has some interesting dialogue about the Fanatics as a group. She's quite religious, and when prompted to ask her thoughts on the raiders, she has this to say.
I believe they are suffering. They think themselves beyond salvation, so they march ever deeper into perdition.
Hanging around the Fanatics, you can also pick up bits of dialogue like this.
Another day. When will it end?
They also cough a lot. But this isn't unique to them, of course, and it's clearly a result of living and breathing in the pit's air. But when you actually kill most of them, they will die saying things like this.
Finally, the struggle is over.
They clearly aren't happy, and talking to characters like the Fanatic Skeptic, many simply may have been led down the wrong path and could be brought back.
You're right. This isn't me. I was just so afraid. I'm leaving, and I'll never work for the Fanatics again. Thanks for giving me a chance.
Which nicely leads us into the next detail. The name Fanatics is indicative of their beliefs. In particular, their apparent belief in one mystery person, the Fanatics leader. Talking to Hex, she has this to say.
Used to be just a bunch of small gangs who couldn't do any real damage by themselves, until some great leader showed up and united them. Well, that's the funny thing. We know they have one. At least they say they do. But we have no idea who they really are. Nobody does. I'm not even sure the people at the top know who really runs the show.
The way she describes the group's ascension and the unity of previously hostile groups by this individual, it has some strong parallels to Lord Asher almost 200 years in the future. He too was revered by scavengers and quickly used his experience to kill the competition and unite the remaining raiders and scavengers into an army. This statue in the Sanctum also bears some similarities to this gruesome piece from the future. Both incorporate human remains and binding chains. Some of the Fanatics' dialogue also has more in common with the Mothman cultists.
You will be sacrificed to the divine light!
Another sacrifice for the cause.
Whether they are suffering or swept up in a fanatical craze, the Fanatics also exhibit extreme cruelty. This isn't unique to them, of course, as raider gangs in Appalachia have also shown similar tendencies, but some of what you can find is particularly nasty, to a point where it can almost seem irrational and obscene, like they aren't of sound mind, like the Wildmen of Fallout 3. The troglodyte degeneration contagion is a term coined by Lord Asher's wife, Dr. Sandra Kundanika, to describe the disease that causes people to degenerate into the creatures we know as trogs. The figures in 2277 indicate that 20% of the adults exposed would eventually become trogs themselves, but for many others the disease simply altered brain chemistry first, and these people became more violent, hostile, and short-tempered. Their emotions became out of control, and their actions teetered on primal. There's no explicit link between these two groups, but it is possible with the Fanatics what we are actually seeing is multiple cases of the TDC taking hold. You can find one interesting note in the sewers where a raider swears a trog he encountered bore a resemblance to an old bunkmate, and it even said his name. Enough about the raiders, it's time to talk about the trogs, because they also have a lot to say. Creeping around them, this is some of the dialogue I picked up.
Devour, thrash.
These creatures are hungry, and they let you know it.
Must feed.
And they're also in pain, as they will constantly complain about a big difference to feral ghouls, which have lost the ability to communicate entirely. Killing the trogs, you can also pick up some pretty harrowing death rattles. You're essentially putting them out of their misery. Heading into the sewers, you can find a lot of these guys, and also a ton of small interesting details. When you pick up troglodyte, make sure to look out for the visual change in third person. Looking around in here, you can find Jangles the Moon Monkey has an extravagant burial, an unfortunate labourer was trapped behind a wall, and this one got me. Looking through the bars, you're met with a wall of darkness. I pressed up against the wall to have a better look, and 3 clapping cymbal monkeys activated in the darkness. This last one might be a stretch, but you can find trogs sitting around eating in different locations. This one by the water's edge is sitting next to an oversized dead fish. I got strong Gollum vibes from this one. You can find some interesting notes down here penned by the Fanatic jailers. This one is addressed to the foreman, and details how Mia was dragged away by trogs. It ends with the author realising he may have been sent down here deliberately to die. This can actually later be confirmed, as reading through the foreman's terminal, the second entry mentions this was indeed something he intended on doing. Interestingly, the foreman you fight in the final mini-boss isn't the same foreman who wrote most of these entries, as the last one tells us he was actually fed to the trogs himself before they picked a new leader. We were first introduced to the Hellcat mercenary company in the Steel Rain update as a group of morally flexible ex-military mercenaries who were hired by Dr. Edgar Blackburn to protect him of Op 96. There was a hint in this update that they would feature in the pit because of this line of dialogue.
This sure is better than dealing with the Fanatics at the pit.
When I first heard this, I assumed the Hellcats would have been hired by the Union to fight the Fanatics. In actuality, however, dealing with the Fanatics turned out to be a literal deal, as the opposite was true. You can find a note left by A. Rhodes in the Fanatic labour camp in the trench, where he clearly states that they were hired by the Fanatics to help them secure the pit. They would storm Union bases and kill everyone in sight. The note also makes it clear their relationship was fracturing, as they complain about working with them and mention how one raider accidentally shot a mercenary during an attack. They also say they've known the pit all their life, perhaps suggesting that this is where the company originates from. In Mission 1 you can also find the body of Sergeant Ning, and another note echoing the first. The mercenaries are almost ready to leave, and Ning went as far to say that they feared the Fanatics would turn on them too. The note also mentions Sergeant Kit and his group have left already. This is who we actually face in Steel Rain. You can find a second note on top of the building. It's a little unclear if this was also written by a Hellcat. Presumably a Union fighter wouldn't need to weigh up whether to shoot at the Fanatics or not. Considering we find Ning dead, it would seem to me that they were either killed by the Union, whose base is very close by, or by the Fanatics. Finally, inside the Foundry, you can actually find a Hellcat contract. This document fully outlines the requirements to join up with the mercenary company, and its location suggests they may have been stationed inside or once controlled it themselves. Heading back to the trench, the area called Jackson's Noose has a secret. Jaxon Reed was a person, whose body you can find holding a letter entitled My Noose. It's a pretty sobering read, as he vividly describes what likely happened to the entire trench, when everything collapsed in on itself. In the letter, he mentions having a friend called Morley. Morley is actually a dog you can find at the outpost where you meet Ava, Rose and Danilo for the second stage of the mission. Continuing through his letter, the inhuman screams are undoubtedly the Trogs. The pool of acid he lands in lines up with all the dumping you can find around the trench, but how did it get there? Well, the biggest clue is the line, "There was a stench in the air like cleaning chemicals and sulphur," which leads us into the number one discovery for today. The trench, a landscape that's bad even by Pitt standards, dominated by pools of toxic water and wreckage from a collapsed motorway. It's where we can find the greatest concentration of Trogs, but now call it home. Coincidentally, it's also where we can find the most evidence of severe waste dumping. The company responsible for the waste? Abraxadine Chemical, creators of the signature Fallout product Abraxo Cleaner. I'll be covering this entire section in more detail in its own video, but throughout Mission 2 you can find terminal entries and notes that detail how severe mismanagement and cost cutting led to Abraxadine dumping waste from their product ID 31148. A terminal at the entrance of the complex belonging to Jacob Doyle, the complex product manager, features a series of increasingly desperate correspondence to the Director of Operations Edgar Clement, asking him to cease production and work on developing a neutralizer. It got so bad that the Pittsburgh Union Railroad refused to ship any more waste, and reading the Yardmaster's terminal, multiple incident reports were sent to Edgar Clement too, detailing how corrosive the waste was, and how his workers were getting sick with something fierce. Throughout the remains of the complex, it becomes clear with more entries and notes, but the need to develop a neutralizer for the waste was outweighed by management's need to continue production. To compound things further, Edgar Clement sent a note round stating that the metal barrels were to be replaced with plastic ones to save costs. A note from a concerned employee highlights the extreme danger these held, as the product chews through these like a kid at a candy store. They go on to say that if they leaked, then an entire city block would need to be shut down for weeks to clean up the fallout. So, what did Abraxadine do? Well, they began dumping all the waste in the backyard. This is what caused the toxic waste, and considering the corrosion mentioned probably contributed to the earthquake, and quite possibly has something to do with the troglodyte degeneration contagion. So what is this mysterious product ID 31148? Jaxon Reed's nose was good, as reading a cheat sheet we learned that the product that caused all of this was industrial grade drain cleaner. Look out for my full breakdown of this, as the back and forth between the multiple parties involved is very interesting, and the potential law ramifications with relation to the Trogs would be huge. That's it for today though. I hope you enjoyed these 10 lore discoveries. I've enjoyed the missions, but most of all I've enjoyed looking through all this, and we have dedicated lore videos coming soon for each faction. Our next video though will be about the Trogs. If you enjoyed this particular video, why not drop a like on it as well. With that said, I am off. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.